Imagine, if you will, a society so wholly corrupted that its citizens view success in terms of crude material wealth while they fight and kill one another to acquire more, more, even as the spirit within is ignored and the soul is cast aside, sold to the highest bidder. In this nightmarish parallel universe, anyone who dares focus on the spiritual rather than the material is labeled mentally ill and often drugged into a stupor, their soul locked away in a pharmaceutical prison lest the seeker become a danger to the stagnant quo. And the dollar signs chased hither, thither, and yon by those labeled normal. The money in this dystopia is not even real, but valueless scraps of paper whose only worth lies in the sweat of lifetimes, laid down by one somnambulous citizen after another, day after meaningless day. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow spent in the slow suicide of the soul, and for what? A paper currency that created, by malicious design, more debt than wealth. A paper currency whose value lies only in the faith of those who hoard it, the same enslaved masses who labor their lives away under the illusion that they are free. Imagine, if you will, this society and its newborn babes handed over to strangers to be cared for and raised. Why? Mother is a debt slave like everyone else, and she firmly believes she was once freed by brave mothers before her. Women called feminists, who gave up every shred of feminine decency in a mad effort to escape hearth and home, where no paper currency is made. What is made in the home? Nourishment for soul and body. But this is not important in our dystopia, and so the young mothers rush off to work and the babes are left behind to drink chemical milk whenever the hired hands of strangers find the time to mix it. Imagine the young in this society as they are bussed away to government buildings day after day, only to be taught the virtues of silent slavery. Here, locked away under artificial lights, the formative years of one's youth and the most vibrant years of one's imagination are snuffed out in the name of standardization. Here the unique are made plain, and any tall poppies are cut down to size. Bits and bytes of useless information are downloaded into these young minds, but never a word about wisdom or the growth of the soul. These things are for the frivolous. Imagine the average citizen of this dystopia who has no idea where his food comes from. He has never once planted a single seed or even dug into the soil, and certainly never the soul, for there is naught but concrete under his feet, and his energies are stifled. Strangers grow the food far away on farms that are more like factories, owned no longer by families but by corporations who concoct one chemical after another to spray on crops that will double, triple in size, and so bring in more paper money, the only green thing that matters. Now imagine, if you will, a group of like-minded folk, unhappy with the stagnant quo, who gather together to discuss and even experience the faith and traditions of their folk and forefathers. Together, they collectively imagine tradition embodied in a dilapidated farmhouse. Walk there with me, down a gravel road, swaying fields on either side, a rustic timber fence missing a slat here and there, and a peeling white farmhouse just ahead on our right. We turn and walk down a neglected path to the sunken porch and climb a few steps, then enter through a torn screen door hanging by one rusted hinge. Inside, the floors are warped but solid, leaves and pine needles strewn here and there, but there is a roaring fireplace in the center of the room. For no matter how neglected it may be, the fires of tradition never go out. It will be neglected no longer, for our great-grandmothers were born here, and they are calling us home, away from the dystopia of modernity with all its waste and endless want. Here we will break the spell of the forgetting. Here we will remember, and we will awaken. Walk through the house and into the backyard. Under the drooping fruit trees sits a well. One drink and you will see them. Our hardened ancestors and the mighty dead. They are waiting for us, each and every one, to awaken from our collective daze and stand with them, arrayed for battle with the modern world. We can sleep no longer. The awakening is upon us. Day by day, bit by bit, and piece by piece, we remember who we are and awaken to a past that can and will serve as a template for a brighter future. Though some of us awaken slowly, others are jolted and shocked into awareness, but we are all on the path to that farmhouse. If you were not, you wouldn't be listening now. I was one of the slow ones, awakening daily over the past 5 years. It was 5 years ago that I published my first novel, Condemnation, and while I sometimes cringe at my earlier works, I know and accept that my writing reveals a process of awakening, sometimes painful, and that others are standing now where I once stood. I can only hope that I have helped to light the way. I will now walk you through my awakening, one book at a time. The first book in the series is Condemnation, which was written with the intent of bringing a memorable chapter of European history to life for the modern audience in hopes that the reader will find value in the past and make an effort to understand our shared history and its continued impact on the present and thereby the future. The story of Joan of Arc was easily superimposed onto present-day so-called biker culture, as there are close parallels between the leather and metal crowds of both eras. The new Joan has cast aside her pious, albeit heretical, Christianity in favor of a questioning philosophy, though both viewpoints still serve to throw a sometimes unwelcome light on the current stagnant quo. This light is absolutely necessary when the stagnant quo is as damaging to the folk soul as is ours. This book is my first attempt at collective remembering, for I will not call it red pilling, but remembering. When I was writing this book, my memories were hazy at best, but they are here. My goal was to turn the story of a pious Christian on its head and hopefully shake out some enlightenment that can be useful to us now. Through Joan, I wanted to ask questions, pose problems, and I wanted the reader to answer on his or her own. I also wanted to show just how dangerous blind faith gone awry can be. As for Joan Archer, my modern-day Joan, she is a character mired in modernity who is desperately trying to fight her way out and back to a more rooted and traditional way of life, though she never consciously expresses this. She is essentially where I was when I wrote the book. She was young and foolish, but a firm believer in duty and honor, a symbol of the struggling folk soul. Here is a brief reading from Condemnation. The rebel element is appealing because it's just so damn human and always has been, clear back to the Garden of Eden. We're all rebels, even the gray suit in the gray cubicle has it in him. Revolutions and rebellions are painful, but we need them, like birthing pains. The pain is what brings us full circle. Time isn't a line, it's a spiral, a macrocosmic mirror image of our DNA. We have to descend before we ascend, because some lessons are learned only in the depths. We'll make our way back to the garden, but it will take a lot of sweat and blood. With good shepherds, though, the flock will arrive safely and will not be a mindless herd any longer. It's like the good shepherd tried to do before they strung him up. Teach them how to fish for themselves. Don't give them a fish only to leave them wanting more and becoming dependent on you. No, a good leader leads to independence, pushing and shoving if need be. These sheep can and will evolve. It's just a matter of time. I think we're on the right path now, that final stretch towards a new reality. Some of us lead, others follow. Some walk ahead on their own, planting trees along the way that allow the truth to filter down gently instead of in a blinding glare that man in his present state cannot comprehend. These gardeners are our artists, writers, musicians, and philosophers. They shade us and feed us truth in doses that increase with each passing generation. Some of us are meant to lead the others to the oases planted by these thinkers. That's our duty, shepherding the evolution of man. Bluebeard asked her, "Does the ephemeral notion of equality fit into this beautiful picture of yours?" Equality? You've read enough and lived through enough to know that there is no such thing. Equal worth for different reasons, maybe, but equality, never. Nor is such a state desirable, not the way our laughable politicians preach it. Imagine the disaster. The artist would suffocate in his cradle. The professor would lecture no one but himself. Society simply would not exist without both dreamers and doers. They're the ones who create new realities, together. Their differences make it all happen. It's just a fact that some people are more evolved than others, and that's okay. Some simply have older souls. That does not make them better, per se, or worth more in terms of human value. It gives them more responsibility. It's their duty, our duty, to lead others down the path. Some of the elite do just that. Others, unfortunately, manipulate and use the masses to their own advantage. But even abuse is necessary on our journey. There are many painful lessons that must be learned. The more knowledge we gain and the more experiences we have, whether for good or ill, the closer we get back to what many call paradise. It was knowledge that threw us out, but wisdom will earn our re-entry. That's why we have to go through this mess we call life. We must prove our worth as sentient beings, not as mindless, obedient sheep. Language plays an important role here, and may be the key to it all. Maybe the fall wasn't a mistake, but a necessary shift into linguistic consciousness, just the beginning of a long process that is our fate. The Abrahamic religions that claim it was a descent into sin are an obstruction to our collective evolution. Lucifer and the proverbial fruit simply mark a transition point. It was a step toward a different state of awareness, and we have to stay on that forward path. It's not a matter of innocence or guilt, equality or superiority. It's a matter of awakening. That was the new Joan. She is a character who embodies the threat to our innate spirituality, which is threatened today as much as it was then, and by largely the same malevolent forces. Forces that want us disconnected and uprooted from who we truly are and who we need to be again. Joan was a manifestation of a slowly awakening will that is fighting its way back to our ancestral roots. This story reflects but one facet of that struggle and just how delicate it is before full awareness sets in. Joan, of course, died before she reached that point. Godless is another facet of the struggle. The narrator is a young girl named Lily in a psychiatric hospital, sent there by her near-death experience at the hands of a madman, Joan's general, Bluebeard, from the previous book. The historical Bluebeard may have been truly mad, but many labeled with this or that number of diagnoses today are not. What they are is a threat to the stagnant quo. Much like any resurgence of traditional folk religion, the often spiritual ramblings of the insane must be shut down by the powers that wish they be. The modern psychiatric industry is corrupted. Far too many of these so-called shrinks no longer perform physical lobotomies, but spiritual ones, a veritable cutting away of the soul. Our would-be myth-makers and those with genuine spiritual vision are locked away and drugged into a stupor, often permanently brain-damaged. It's an exorcism with pills rather than potions, but such was not the case in 17th century France, which is where Lily's narration takes us. As the book progresses, she confuses her story with that of a convent possession and subsequent witch trial, that of the famous Urbain Grandier, who would not confess though his inquisitors crushed his bones. This rogue priest was also a threat to the stagnant quo, and he made no apologies. He wanted the protective wall to remain around his community. He wanted to elevate the local in lieu of the national. He wanted to expose the corruption of the globalist, universalist church and allow local tradition into the faith. Grandier would have seceded from the Union in the Old South. Today he would be considered a domestic terrorist. A character like his had to be put down by the same forces trying so desperately to silence anyone on the right today. Like those who speak out now, he was silenced with outrageous accusations that became court convictions as the convent he allegedly cursed slowly became an asylum, one mirroring the experiences of the narrator, whose spiritual insights would never see the light of day. She was locked up and silenced. The powers that wish they be must likewise silence anyone who might bring a community back to its roots, any who might inspire a mass remembering and awakening. The global industrial complex, of which psychiatry and big pharma are a large part, does not want you to remember who you are or where you came from, for if you did, you might also remember that you are capable of, and their house of cards would fall. Nonetheless, when you realize what they are about, you will experience an awakening. Here are just a few paragraphs from the book. Nature is vilified, our inner nature as much as the green darkness of the world out there. Perhaps they are reflections of one another. If so, our fear and destruction of nature is a fear and destruction of our innermost selves. What are we afraid of? The unknown, for here be monsters. So we fortify, erect fences, bulldoze the teeming green, and cover it with lifeless gray because it makes us feel better. Gives us a sense of control over our environments and ourselves. Control, however, is an illusion. We should befriend the dragon, not slay it. Face the inner beast and give the devil his due. Peace comes from integration, not illusory conquest. The result of facing the beast may well be madness. Ignoring it certainly is, though we tend to call that sanity in this mad culture. Point is, madness lies just in wait around the corner for us all. Why not confront it head on, get to its core, and come out on the other side with a more genuine and balanced view of reality? Such is the journey. We fall. We experience consciousness and all its horrors. Then we emerge on the other side of our soul's abyss. Hence our desperate creation of religion, with its requisite descent, followed by a shift in our thinking, and finally an ascent to a more complete state of being. Always the same storyline, rewritten again and again and again. Too often we fail to see the parallel. Fear blinds us to the reality we've foolishly created. We fear the dark, the deep, even the green. Green and black, that reminds me of a dream, a devil dressed in green and black. I know what it means now. The devil, ever the green man, lurking in the dark corners of nature and all the places we're told to avoid. Is he in our souls as well? Yes, at the depths. If we ignore him, he may spread his verdant tentacles up our soul's wall, into its core, into its height, choking out whatever has grown in his way. But we need not bear the blame for the ensuing chaos. The devil made us do it. Just what does this symbolic devil make us do? Awaken, and so our society tells us to avoid him in all his forms, heathen or otherwise. I'm telling you to look to the dark, the deep, the mysterious, and discover the secrets it holds. Nothing has been darkened like our folk's past, and the powers that wish they be would like to keep the lights out. But dawn is on the horizon, and we as a people are awakening. The process may be slow at times, but it is unstoppable. As we remember who we are and reclaim our past and its stories, we can write new tales, steeped in the lore of old. Such is the next book in the series, The Twisted Rib. This book is also a spin-off of the first and takes place at a magical house in the Hallows, the in-between place linking our everyday world to that of what the Celts might call the fairy realm, though it has many names. The characters are women from the Bible, yes, the sinful ones, and yes, that Bible. Again, this is traditional religion turned upside down, as these women are spiritual guides rather than moral hindrances. No, this is not about feminism, but about restoring balance. Modern feminism is often about emasculating men. This book is an attempt to re-masculate them. Both the men and the women in this book have taken a beating by modernity, much like our traditional deities, and neither should necessarily be seen as victim or villain, but as complementary poles of being. We need both goddesses and gods. This is an attempt at a healing of the folk soul using characters familiar to those likely the most scarred. The women are all practitioners of traditional European folk faiths in one way or another, just as all are abused by monotheism, but they are aware. It is their task to bring awareness to their visitors, men brought there by their soul's song, for no one else can even see the magical house in the Hallows. Again, we are urged to remember. I had not yet formally declared this in my own mind, but it is on every page just the same. The monotheism we see all around us is turned on its head, upside down, to try and find some reason behind it all. Who is to blame for the spiritual mess we are in? This is the question the book asks. Here is a reading from the modern-day Magdalene. What does my morality have to do with anything? Is that your theme for the week? What was it last week? Minorities? Widows and orphans? I don't jump on passing bandwagons. I walk the earth. Have your feet ever touched it? Perhaps you're too righteous, or perhaps you've never done more than jump from one cause to another without letting your precious and unsullied feet touch the ground. Did they tell you that you had to? Did they preach the public good, progress, social value? Did you listen without thinking? Of course you did. Who needs to think when someone else has already done it for you? And that someone surely has society's best interest in mind. Society's best interest must be yours as well, right? Do you actually believe in that mythic phantom, public welfare, because you've allowed a nameless entity to label you liberal or conservative, gay, a minority, a Christian? What label have you bent down to carry? What just cause have they told you to support? Ask those beside you on the bandwagon du jour, do you really believe this? If any of your fellow riders were honest, they would say no, but then such a figure would never ride beside you, would never jump simply because she was told to jump. No, such a figure would walk the earth, her 2 defiant feet firmly planted, carrying herself alone, and you will call her maladjusted, tell her she needs therapy from one or more of your invented disciplines, all the while you curse her and silently envy her freedom. Next is an excerpt from the New Jezebel. Ah, the Ph.D., the M.D., the academic of many letters, how they dance round an issue as if round a cauldron bubbling with doubt and denial. In a trance they see as reality, given their frenzy to explain anything and everything away in fits of spiraling logic, they do not see the paradox they've created. Their frenzied dance is little different than the ecstasy of the witch, the trance of the shaman, even as they futilely attempt to portray those they would belittle. Perhaps they become expert in a subject because their soul calls them to it, but they fear losing their precious reason, their logic. They fear losing the reflection they see as their authentic selves. They never pick up a drum, dirty their hands, or move with the seasons. Instead, they study it all objectively from the confines of a respectable ivory tower, a dark cloud limiting their sight. Of course, there are those whose genuine calling is to teach, to set others on their path, and they are all but consumed by the machine higher education has become. Their movements constrained by publishing, performing, pleasing. If you dare stray too far from the box you've been so graciously allowed to teach in, you will lose your job. There are, after all, dozens of mindless geniuses waiting to take your place. But there is hope. There are voices that cannot be silenced, their vibrations causing the ivory tower to slowly crumble. Yes, these women are sacred prostitutes, and this book is what might be called naughty, but not in an effort to be sensational. Our attitudes towards sexuality are just as damaged as our attitudes towards spirituality. The two do not have to be separated. This is an attempt to remember a time when our bodies could be temples, not curses as in the Abrahamic faiths. Unconsciously, it is an attempt to remember a time when men and women knew and embraced their complementary roles. The title, by the way, is taken from an obscure reference to the creation of Eve, wherein she is declared hopelessly corrupt, along with all of womankind, because the rib used to make her was twisted, which is a nice way to describe the course of my life between this book and the next one, The Forgetting. During this time, I was woke, as they say. What that means is I got angry and fed up with the daily physical and spiritual attacks on all of us. When the narrator of this book saw Joan burned alive, she skipped town and went on a soul-searching road trip. She, too, was angry, but not too angry to ask questions and look for answers. She writes it all down, and that is the meat of the book. Nothing is off limits here. Islam, Christianity, Judaism, feminism, academia, fiat currency, Black Lives Matter, Mexican immigration, gay pride, and of course traditional European religiosity and its crucial role in the awakening of our folk soul. Why is the white race the only race not allowed any pride? Why is the white man alone guilted into subservience? Why is tradition eroded? Why is the family broken? This book is an attempt to answer all of that and to remember what we are fighting for, while at the same time to declare loud and clear that we are, in fact, involved in a fight. Here is a reading from The Forgetting. The masses are rootless, severed from their ancestral source and told we are all one, and this from the same venom-dripping tongues that preach the values of multiculturalism. Multi, that is, unless you are of Norse descent and hold to Asa True. Of African descent? Embrace your voodoo. Of Arabic descent? Let us make concessions for your Islam. Of Celtic descent? Let us scream racist and tear your culture from you the second you start to remember. Teutonic? How dare you bring up anything that stinks of Germanicism? The hypocrisy of the puppeteers is blatant and intentional. Whites are made to feel guilty. Our roots are severed. Why? Because we dared what others wouldn't or couldn't. Look closer still, and you'll see blood and tears everywhere. We are all villains. We are all victims. This is the only oneness we should embrace, the oneness and responsibility for an entire species gone horribly awry. If you see right here and wrong there, cut your strings. You're being played. They can play you because you've no roots, nothing to draw strength from, nothing to keep them from jerking you this way and that. Find your roots. Remember your ancestors. Embrace your color not as a racist, but as one who is racially aware. There is a subtle but crucial difference, and that difference is the critical line between exclusivist hatred and an autonomous appreciation of diversity. We can all take pleasure in the beauty of the rainbow and our own unique color within it. They can play you because you feel powerless. You have forgotten who you are. Skin color is only superficial. Forget about it. Race doesn't exist. They say. Yes, brown is a color painted on the surface, but is Congolese only skin deep? What about Kenyan? There is a world hiding in those words. Find it before it's lost forever. What about yellow? It's just another color. But is Tibetan merely a gloss? No, but surely white is just a color. Of course it is, but is Slavic? Nordic? No. When we sever our roots from the spirit behind these colors, we become powerless. Look to the indigenous American with his coppered skin and all his leather-clad glory. Here is a man with strength. Look at him instead in a flannel shirt by a rusted trailer, beer in hand. Here is a man severed, powerless. Did white do that to him? No. The powers that be, colorless souls who only care about gold, did that to him, and they are doing it to all of us. They are not finished. Find your roots. Find your power. Power cannot be found in mounds of hoarded gold, but in the soul of the Viking who remembers the sagas. It lies like a buried treasure in the heart of the Aboriginal who refuses modernity, in the Indian who covers himself with ash and doesn't give a goddamn for the rest of the world. Power can be found in the hands of the black Southerner who refuses baptism and instead picks up a mask and a drum. We are not one. We are many, and we are powerful. The hoarders of gold want us to forget that. Whether you remember Christ crucified or Odin hung from a tree, remember. Remember that both changed their worlds, and let the rest of the world have its own stories of greatness. Remember your stories. Remember that we are not a gray mass, but a colorful multitude with the power to cut our strings, whether with scimitar, tomahawk, or broadsword. Generally speaking, all of these books present an overarching problem. The final 2 books in the series will be an attempt to present a solution. In very general terms, if we go way back, we will find that something went horribly wrong in human spirituality. Somehow, belief in general was turned on its head. In the Old Testament, for instance, Yahweh was originally a dual god called Malach Yahweh, good and evil combined, who was later separated into distinct good and evil components. We can determine this from modern translations as well as the Hebrew scrolls. It is my suspicion that a fraction of powerful believers followed the negative aspect of the god, whether knowingly or not, and they drug a bunch of fervent and foolish followers with them. The worship of this negative aspect of divinity continues today. Again, this is grossly oversimplified. The important thing is this. What is presented in our society as the monotheistic religions is an inversion of an ancient belief system. The Abrahamic faiths are upside down, and these are the faiths that have most colored our modern world, like it or not. As such, they must be dealt with. With that in mind, remember this. Anything presented to us as upside down is, in effect, right side up. Is this perhaps why Odin had to hang upside down to find genuine wisdom? In a topsy-turvy world, what seems backward may be exactly that which points you in the right direction. And so, I have turned things on their head in these books and will continue to do so. We must reclaim and even rewrite our myths. We must learn our own myth and lore and then formulate a strengthened Northern European mythos to unleash when the time is right. Much like Fenrir marched out of that cave. Corrupted story got us into this mess. The stories and beliefs of our ancestors were undermined, corroded, and belittled. Our myths have been poisoned, but they are still with us. The antidote is memory. We must remember the old ways and bring them back into our lives. This is how we turn things right side up again. This is how we awaken. The next book in the series, called The Forsaken, will be about a folk awakening. I'll read a brief excerpt. Memory and tradition are the result of sacrifice. To casually forget or willfully cast aside one's own past is a grave dishonor. To assume modernity allows us to live without sacrifice is sheer folly. To live without concern for what follows is a crime. Crime after crime after crime, and we finally reach the end of an epoch. Is that where we are now? This is the end, the place where we begin again. The veil between this world and the next is lifting. Our consciousness is shifting. The dead are not coming back to life. We are simply remembering that they never left us. The resurrection of memory is powerful, even earth-shattering. Our mono-minded scientists will prattle on about reactivating dormant DNA and accessing parallel universes, but they fail to see that the universe is within, and the DNA of our mighty dead never went dormant. It is alive and well, twisting and turning like a serpent inside each of us. When the veil strung across the center of our minds lifts, we will know the meaning of this thing called apocalypse. Expecting a reply, I looked up and saw nothing save the expanse of the desert, but I heard something moving towards me, a voice rumbling across the sands atop a stinging breeze. Ragnarok has yet to be written. Silence. I was alone again, alone at the end of the world, alone to ponder memory, tradition, and sacrifice. Somehow these things are wrapped round each other, serpents coiling up our spines, piercing our minds, beguiling us to act if only we would listen. Modern man finds it hard to listen to the voice whispering within when the clamoring noise without is so much louder, and so the serpent slithers and strikes louder and louder, demanding to be heard. Those who ignore the hissing and rattling are doomed to madness. In a world gone mad, does it matter? No, for those deemed worthy to diagnose madness are suffering from the same symptoms, and they are equally deaf to the stirring and shifting within. Doomed to madness, all of them, for the veil within their minds will not simply lift, rather it will tear into 1,000 pieces, and they will never recover. They have forgotten who they are and where they came from. They have forgotten the blood, sweat, tears, and years that brought us all here. They have mocked, derided, and betrayed all that preceded them. This bridge once burned cannot be rebuilt. Roots once severed will never grow again. This is why we must remember and awaken before the forgetting takes us, before we are convinced that we have no culture. Those of European descent have been told that they have no culture. I am here to tell you that we do, and that ours is an amazing culture that has shaped the world like no other could ever dream. Embrace your roots, remember your traditions, and awaken at long last. Awaken the wrath of the Saxon if that is what it takes. Just awaken. Still, we've all heard the contentious phrase, whites have no culture. If that were true, Caucasians as a race would have nothing to lose and nothing to fight for. The phrase, however, is not true, not by any interpretation, and hundreds if not thousands of advocates for the white race have sought to counter the assertion, both in the streets and online. This collection of images is one such counter. Not a screaming denial, not an emotional plea, and not a denigration of others. These images are but a few steps on a long, silent march. Walk with me. On this long march, our heads are held high as we take one sure step after another, only slowing our steady pace to speak to the fool from his folly, and to take advantage of any opportunity to use our enemy's weakness against him. Because image and language no longer hold value save to manipulate the masses, this is where we will gather our troops. Sometimes the pen truly is mightier than the sword, and any well-placed image speaks for 1,000 pens. Images, you see, work an alchemy on the mind. Ideas form, ideals change. When this power to incite change is relegated to the subconscious, it does not dissipate. Rather, it builds momentum, erupts bit by steady bit in the hearts and minds of our fellow citizens, one questing eye at a time. This patient power is mercifully forgotten by the string pullers, who wrongly assume that they are the only ones who wield it. Therein lies the breach, and the charge is prepared whilst the impostors in the castle look the other way. Are you looking the other way? No one will take the time to read a book when the programming on the big screen is so engaging, right? No one will ponder a haunting image or turn a phrase when they can go to a sporting event, right? No one will meditate on our ancestors' history and culture without the state-sanctioned map provided by our decaying universities, right? The confidence of the impostors in the of course not answers to the above questions is so high that one could sneak past it all right under their arrogance. Anyone can show a collection of images that silently and subtly remind the reader of the grand and glorious past of his own people. But no one will pay it any attention, right? But you are listening. You are awake now. Clearly the impostors are wrong. There is a crack in their foundation. With one word at a time, one image at a time, and one heartfelt ritual at a time, we are making their modern world crumble. Once more into the breach, my friends, for this world is descending into madness, and something must be done to turn our course. Without pride of self, without something to fight for, we as a people are finished. I urge you then, take it back. Take back your past, for it is yours for the taking. This is our heritage, the heritage of the mighty European who has wrought more change on this fair globe than any other shade of man. Imagine, if you will, that these images are a call to action that point the way forward. Walk forward with me. No culture, they said, and so we set our tails to dance. No culture, they said, and so we took to heart epics of knights and dragons. No culture, they said, and so we composed one stirring symphony after another. Again, no culture, and so we sculpted our gods into life. No culture, they persisted, and so we painted our finest moments. No culture, they said, and so we built fairy tales of brick and stone. No culture, they said, and so we sang songs of myths and heroes. No culture, they moaned, and so we carved into eternity. Still they claimed no culture, and so we forged the very metals of the earth. No culture, they complained, and still we believed. No culture, they whined, and so we sailed into the wild unknown. Again, no culture, and so we harnessed the power of the skies. No culture, they said, and so we honed our bodies and competed for our gods. No culture, they said, and so we pondered the meaning of life. No culture, they accused, and so we wrote tales of devils and men. No culture, they said, and so we performed on the world's stage. Again, no culture, and so we played loudly over hill and dale. No culture, they said, and so we flew high above their noise. They wouldn't stop, and so we showed them our golden gods. No culture, they groaned again, and so we crafted poems that speak to the soul. Still no culture, and so we bid the sickness cease. No culture, they said, and so we filled full the mouth of famine. No culture, they said, and so we celebrated without them. No culture, once more they groaned, and so we marked the solstice, the rebirth of our sons. No culture, and so we slowly awakened to what was and is ours. No culture, they said, and so we summoned our smiths. No culture, they charged, and so we sharpened our blades. They screamed no culture, and so we gathered our forces. No culture, they persisted, and so we prepared our souls for a long battle. You have no culture, they wailed, and so we finally stood up and defeated them. I wrote a book about a forgetting, but I am calling each of you to a remembering. We can defeat this if we remember who we are and where we came from. And so remember and never forget.